Tulay Goren was just 15 years old when she vanished from her home in East London. She was a Kurdish schoolgirl, quiet but determined. After years of strict rules, fear, and control at home, Tulay wanted something different. She had fallen in love with an older man, someone who treated her with kindness, someone who gave her hope. His name was Halil Unal. But to her father, that love was shameful. Tulay had broken his rules. She had made her own choice, and in his eyes, she had brought dishonor to the family. For Mehmet Goren, that meant only one thing: Tulay had to be punished. On January 6, 1999, Tulay was tricked into coming home. Her father said it was just for a short visit. But it wasn't. That night, he tied her up. He gave her coffee laced with sleeping tablets so she couldn't escape again. Then he told his wife Hanim and their two youngest children to leave the house. He said he needed to talk to Tulay alone. It was the last time anyone out the family saw her alive. Before she disappeared, Tulay managed to make one final call to her boyfriend. She whispered, "Don't come, it's a trap." And then, silence. No body was found. No emergency search was launched. Her father told the police she had run away again. And just like that, her story disappeared. No one asked deeper questions. No one came looking. But not everyone believed the lie. 10 years later, the truth began to surface. In 2007, police reopened Tulay's case. This isn't just the story of a missing girl. It's the story of a child who wanted freedom. A girl who chose love over fear and paid for it with her life. This is the story of Tulay Goren. Welcome to the Crime Series. Before we begin, do us a quick favor. Drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. We want to know where you're tuning in from, because these stories matter everywhere. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Tulay Goren was born in March 1983 in the town of Elbistan, located in the Kurdish majority region of southeastern Turkey. It was a modest, conservative community where traditions ran deep and family honor shaped the rules of daily life. Tulay was the eldest of 4 children born to Mehmet and Hanim Goren, a Kurdish couple from the Alevi Muslim tradition. From the beginning, Tulay's life was intertwined with cultural expectations that placed obedience above individuality and silence above self-expression. In the early to mid-1990s, the Goren family fled Turkey and migrated to the United Kingdom, seeking asylum after arriving as undocumented immigrants. While the move to Britain offered the hope of safety and a fresh start, it did little to change Mehmet Goren's outlook. The family eventually settled in Woodford Green, East London, a diverse suburb where immigrant families sought new beginnings. But for Mehmet, assimilation was not an option. He rejected British culture, refused to learn English, and clung tightly to the conservative customs of his homeland. He brought with him a mindset that shaped every aspect of his family's life. Before coming to the UK, Mehmet had served time in prison in Turkey, and possibly in Saudi Arabia, due to his involvement in militant Kurdish political activity. These experiences appeared to harden him further, deepening his authoritarian personality. Those close to the family described him as a man consumed by pride, rage, and a rigid belief in male dominance. At home, he ruled with force and fear. His wife Hanim, quiet and illiterate, took a backseat role in the household. She had been married to Mehmet at just 15 years old and had spent her life under his control. Years later, she would speak about the fear that dominated her every decision, the fear of her husband's anger, and the fear of what would happen if she dared to defy him. Within the walls of their home, daily life was marked by fear and submission. Mehmet's word was law. He used violence to discipline his children and to enforce silence. Hanim and the children were forced into obedience. Neighbors would later recall sounds of shouting, sharp anger in Mehmet's voice, and the way Hanim kept her eyes down when spoken to. Witnesses described a household where affection was rare and fear was constant. As the eldest child, Tulay carried much of this burden. From a young age, she was expected to set an example, one that reflected complete submission to her father's rules. But Tulay was different. She was observant, sensitive, and quietly questioning. Over time, she became aware of the stark contrast between her home and the outside world. She absorbed the tension around her but began to resist it, not through open defiance, but through small, subtle acts of individuality, expressions of her longing for freedom. Her greatest escape was school. At Woodbridge High School, Tulay found a place where she could breathe, even if only for a few hours a day. She was a quiet student but thoughtful. Her teachers noted her attentiveness and curiosity, even as she struggled with focus and signs of anxiety. She had few friends, but valued those connections deeply. In quiet conversations, she hinted at problems at home, though rarely spoke in detail. The pressure she felt at home sometimes spilled into her academic life. Difficulty concentrating, nervous glances, a hesitancy to speak too freely. But there were also moments when her spirit shone through. A smile during a group project, a curious question in class, the laughter she shared when she felt safe. As Tulay entered her teenage years, the conflict between her home life and her growing desire for independence became more intense. By the summer of 1998, something had changed. Friends and teachers began to notice a shift. She seemed brighter, more expressive. Her clothes were neater, her face more open, but her eyes, as one friend put it, held a kind of sadness that no one could explain. At home, things were different. Mehmet's grip on the family remained tight, but Tulay was beginning to test the limits. She questioned more, complied less, and started spending time away from home. She was finding her voice, but that voice was growing louder in a house where silence had always been expected. That tension between freedom and control would soon reach a breaking point. By autumn, Tulay was walking a tightrope between two worlds. In one world, she was a daughter bound by tradition, fear, and cultural codes that dictated who she could speak to, where she could go, and what her future should look like. In the other, she was a young woman discovering her own path, tasting freedom, dreaming of love, and imagining a life without fear. Tulay often felt like her life was not her own. But during the summer of her 15th year, while working a temporary job at a bustling clothing factory in Hackney, East London, something changed. There, among the clatter of sewing machines and the chatter of workers from all walks of life, she crossed paths with a man named Halil Unal. He was a fellow Turkish Kurd, but from a very different world, older, calmer, and more experienced. At around 30 years old, Halil was a significant presence. He wasn't just older in age, but in composure. He exuded a quiet confidence, the kind that made people pause and listen. Many in the factory believed he was in management due to the way he carried himself. To Tulay, who had never known warmth from her father, Halil seemed like everything she had been missing. Respectful, kind, and deeply attentive. Though their cultural roots were similar, their religious backgrounds differed. Halil was from the Sunni tradition, while Tulay came from an Alevi Muslim household. In many parts of Turkey, these sectarian divides could be more than just theological. They shaped entire communities, determined marriages, and created lifelong divides. Yet in the diverse environment of Hackney, those divisions seemed to blur. For Tulay, meeting Halil felt like stepping into a world where she was not just a daughter or a burden, but a person with thoughts, feelings, and a future of her own. Their connection wasn't born from flirtation or games. It grew slowly, through quiet talks, respectful exchanges, and an increasing sense of emotional safety. Halil noticed Tulay's nervous smiles and hesitant voice. He could see that she carried more than the usual teenage weight. When she began to open up, it wasn't with loud declarations, but in cautious fragments. She told him little by little about her home life, the harsh discipline, the absence of affection, and the feeling that she was living someone else's life. Halil, in return, offered not only a listening ear, but a sense of validation. He didn't dismiss her fears or brush off her pain. He respected her boundaries. When Tulay talked about wanting something more, a life where she could study, choose her path, and breathe freely, he didn't laugh. He encouraged her. That kindness, that rare moment of being treated as an equal, made all the difference. For a girl raised in silence, his simple attention felt like oxygen. Their bond deepened in secrecy. They met discreetly, sometimes in shared spaces after work, or on walks where they wouldn't be seen. Tulay's friends at Woodbridge High School began to notice the change. One of them later said, the only time Tulay smiled or seemed happy was when she talked about Unal. Her spirits had lifted. Even her appearance began to shift. Brighter clothes, more confident posture, as though she was beginning to imagine a life outside the shadows of her father's home. But the happiness was fragile. Behind the scenes, Tulay lived in fear that her father would find out. Mehmet Goren was not just a strict parent, he ruled his household with fear. A man shaped by militant politics, prison time, and deeply rooted patriarchal beliefs, Mehmet considered any form of disobedience a direct attack on his authority. He never learned English, rarely worked, and instead demanded full control over his family. To him, women were meant to obey, and daughters were expected to preserve the family's reputation, what his community referred to as namus. When Mehmet discovered Tulay's relationship with Halil, his fury was immediate and explosive. To him, it wasn't just about a teenage crush. It was betrayal. Halil wasn't just older, he was Sunni. And Tulay, his daughter, had dared to not only hide this relationship, but to emotionally invest in it. In Mehmet's rigid worldview, this was shameful. Tulay had chosen her own path, something no daughter of his was permitted to do. And worse, she had chosen a man outside their religious sect, from a tradition he did not respect. In many Kurdish communities, particularly among the older generations and those from rural areas, the concept of honor, namus, is tied tightly to the behavior of women. A daughter's choices reflect directly on the reputation, sheref, of her father and male relatives. Tulay's secret relationship, in Mehmet's mind, had brought disgrace. She had made the family a target for whispers and judgment from others in their close-knit community. Even though they lived in London, Mehmet still operated as if they were in a village, where honor was public currency and shame was a death sentence. The situation quickly escalated. Mehmet's anger turned into action. On December 10, 1998, he went to Halil's workplace at Tekran Trading in Hackney. Without warning, he launched a violent attack on Halil in front of colleagues, shouting threats and accusing him of stealing his daughter's honor. Police were called, and the incident was documented. But Halil, perhaps out of fear or hope that peace could be restored, refused to press charges. He still believed that, if he could speak calmly with Mehmet, they might find a way forward, perhaps even get his blessing to marry Tulay. But Mehmet had no intention of allowing Tulay to choose her own future. To him, her independence was rebellion. Her love was betrayal. Her hope was an insult. Later that same day, after Mehmet Goren had violently confronted and assaulted Halil Unal at his workplace, he and his family took further steps that seemed calculated rather than emotional. Instead of de-escalating the situation, Mehmet escalated it further by taking the matter to the authorities. He went to the local police station along with other members of the family and filed an official complaint against Halil. They accused him of pestering Tulay, painting him as an older man preying on a teenage girl. The accusation came just hours after Mehmet had physically attacked Halil at the factory, which made the timing suspicious. To many observers, this complaint seemed less about protecting Tulay and more about redirecting attention, an effort to flip the narrative and cast Halil as the aggressor. Mehmet appeared to be attempting to shift legal and moral blame onto Halil, using the system to regain control by involving the police and making Halil look like the offender. But the plan didn't work as intended. Although the police logged the complaint, there wasn't enough evidence or clear wrongdoing by Halil to pursue serious charges at the time. No legal action was taken. But the pressure on Tulay did not ease. In fact, it only made her more determined to make her own choices. Just 4 days later, on the 14th of December 1998, Tulay made a bold and life-changing decision. She left her family home on her own terms and went to live with Halil Unal in Hackney. For someone raised in a tightly controlled household, this was more than teenage rebellion. It was an act of resistance. By choosing to live with Halil, Tulay was rejecting her father's authority and the strict rules of her upbringing. She was stepping into a world where she could be free, even if that world was uncertain and dangerous. This was not just a teenage love story. It was a clash between two very different worlds. A modern, individualistic society where love is a personal choice, and an older, traditional system where family honor and obedience were everything. Tulay's move out was a clear signal. She wasn't willing to live under her father's control any longer. She had chosen love and personal freedom over fear and submission. At first, the Goren family responded with panic and anger. They reported her to the police as a missing person. But again, their actions seemed strategic rather than driven by genuine concern for Tulay's well-being. At the same time, they filed a new report against Helpless, this time accusing him of engaging in an illegal sexual relationship with a minor. In the UK, the legal age of consent is 16. Tulay was just 15, which made this a potentially serious charge if proven. However, this legal complaint also didn't lead to any charges. There was no direct evidence, and Tulay herself appeared to be with Helpless willingly. But something soon changed within the Goren household. Almost overnight, the family shifted their stance. Instead of continuing with accusations and legal threats, they announced that they were willing to accept the relationship. In fact, they went as far as agreeing to a civil marriage between Tulay and Helpless. This sudden turnaround confused many who knew the family's strict beliefs and the recent violent confrontation between Mehmet and Helpless. A wedding date was quickly arranged for the 21st of December 1998 at the Hackney Register Office. To some, it seemed like a breakthrough. Others believed it was a trap. Why would Mehmet Goren, who had just physically attacked Helpless and accused him of corrupting his daughter, now agree to a marriage? There were several possible reasons. The family may have realized that continued resistance would bring unwanted attention from authorities and the wider community. Agreeing to the marriage could calm the situation publicly while buying them time to regain control of Tulay behind closed doors. Another theory was more sinister, that the family never truly intended to allow the marriage to happen. Instead, the offer of marriage may have been a way to lure Tulay back into their grasp. Tulay, hopeful that peace was possible and that her relationship might now be accepted, began preparing for the ceremony. But even that plan fell apart. When officials at the register office reviewed the paperwork, they discovered that Tulay was still underage. In the United Kingdom, individuals must be at least 16 to marry, even with parental consent. Tulay, born in March 1983, was still only 15. As a result, the wedding could not legally go ahead. Helpless had believed Tulay was 17 based on what she told him and how she presented herself. Mehmet, desperate to push the marriage forward, reportedly tried to convince the registrar to ignore the legal issue. He even attempted to bribe the registrar to allow the ceremony. But the registrar refused and the wedding was cancelled. A new date was arranged. Tulay's 16th birthday was set to fall on the 8th of March 1999. According to UK law at the time, once she reached that age, she would be legally eligible to marry, without needing special court permission. Until then, she and Helpless waited, hopeful that they would soon be able to make their relationship official. Despite the difficult start, it seemed, for a moment, that the worst might be over. Tulay continued living with Helpless during this waiting period. Their home wasn't ideal, a small shared apartment in Hackney, where Helpless lived with another male flatmate. But for Tulay, it was the first space where she felt even a measure of freedom. She was no longer under her father's constant gaze. The bruises were starting to fade. Her days were quieter, and her anxiety had lessened, at least outwardly. Helpless, although much older, treated her with a gentleness that stood in sharp contrast to the violence and fear she had grown up with. She believed, perhaps naively, that the worst of the storm had passed. She had run away, spoken up, and stood her ground. And now it seemed her family had accepted her decision. There was no more shouting, no more police reports, and no more threats, at least not that she could see. But beneath the surface, Mehmet Goren was not finished. Far from it. On the 6th of January 1999, just 2 months before Tulay's 16th birthday, Mehmet paid a visit to Halil. He arrived at the shared flat unexpectedly. He was calm. Too calm. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no visible rage. Instead, he presented himself as a father simply trying to do the right thing. Mehmet said he had concerns. He told Halil he didn't like the fact that his daughter was living in a flat with a man she wasn't yet married to. It was inappropriate, he said. Shameful. Unacceptable by their cultural and religious standards. It wasn't right for Tulay to share a home with another man, especially with Halil's flatmate also living there. Then Mehmet made a proposal. He said the situation could be fixed. All Halil had to do was allow Tulay to return home. For a little while. Just until he found better accommodation. A place where they could live alone as a proper couple, with no one else involved. Once that was sorted, Mehmet said, Tulay could go back to Halil and resume their relationship. He gave his word. It would only be temporary. Halil believed him. He had no reason to suspect otherwise. After all, just weeks earlier, the family had agreed to the wedding. Despite the initial rage and violence, they seemed to have calmed down. Tulay's mother hadn't objected. The threats had stopped. Mehmet's tone now was measured and reasonable. He spoke like a father who was willing to compromise, trying to protect his daughter's dignity in a difficult situation. Halil, a man raised within the same cultural framework, understood the importance of family honor, even if he didn't agree with how far Mehmet had taken it. And so, wanting to do the right thing, Halil agreed. Tulay, too, accepted her father's request, though likely with hesitation. She may have believed, as Halil did, that it would only be for a short time, that her return home was a gesture of peace, a way to show respect while still holding on to her choice. She packed a few things and said goodbye. On that day, January 6, 1999, she walked out of the Hackney flat and went back to her father's house. Before we continue, if you're finding this story powerful and important, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from us. And if you truly value the work we do, you can now send us a super thanks below the video. Or become a part of our membership community to support this channel and get early access to upcoming stories. Every bit of support helps us tell the stories that matter. As Tulay returned home, that was the last time anyone outside the household saw Tulay Goren. Exactly what happened to Tulay after she returned home remains a mystery. One wrapped in silence and fear. There were no eyewitnesses, no confession, and no body. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Her absence wasn't met with sirens or headlines. It was met with silence. The kind of silence that speaks volumes. Inside the Goren household, no one asked questions out loud. Outside, the story was controlled by one voice, Mehmet Goren's. According to court records, he told relatives and members of the local Turkish-Kurdish community that Tulay had run away again, just like before. He repeated it calmly, with conviction, and many believed him, or at least chose not to challenge him. For a while, that story held. Halil Ünal, the man Tulay had lived with for several weeks, tried desperately to reach her. He called repeatedly. He asked friends and even went by the family home, hoping for a glimpse of her. There was nothing. No word, no sign, no explanation. The girl who once smiled when she spoke his name had vanished, and the silence from her family was chilling. Her schoolmates too noticed. Tulay had just disappeared. No one in authority seemed to be looking. No one from the police made a public appeal. There were no posters, no announcements. Her case had quietly fallen through the cracks. Then something strange happened. On January 20th, 1999, 2 weeks after Tulay was last seen, Mehmet Goren contacted Halil directly. He said he wanted to talk. He asked Halil to meet in person, claiming he wanted to discuss Tulay's return home and what the future might look like. Mehmet said they needed to settle things once and for all. To Halil, the offer seemed genuine, maybe even hopeful. He had been living with fear and uncertainty, and now there was a chance, however small, to understand what had happened. They agreed to meet at the Thatched House pub in Leytonstone, a public setting that likely made Halil feel somewhat safer. He hoped it would be a civil conversation, perhaps tense but peaceful. He hoped Mehmet might finally explain where Tulay was, or even allow him to see her. He came with questions and a fragile sense of hope. But Mehmet had no intention of talking. He came with a weapon. According to police reports and court testimony, Mehmet arrived at the meeting carrying an axe. He had hidden it carefully. He waited for the moment Halil let his guard down. And then, without warning, he attacked. The blow was sudden, brutal, and calculated. Mehmet swung the axe with full force, striking Halil and causing serious injuries to his head and upper body. Blood spilled across the pub surroundings as patrons screamed and ran for help. The attack was swift and shocking, an explosion of violence in a public place, revealing just how far Mehmet was willing to go to erase the man who had dared to love his daughter. Halil somehow survived. He was rushed to the hospital with critical injuries. The physical pain was immense, but even worse was the emotional blow. The realization that Tulay wasn't just missing, she was in real life-threatening danger, and no one had protected her. Mehmet was arrested shortly after the attack. He was charged and later convicted of grievous bodily harm with intent, a serious violent offense. In 2001, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. At the time, the axe attack was treated as an isolated incident. Authorities did not yet connect it fully to Tulay's disappearance. But that event, violent, public, and deliberate, would later become a turning point. It exposed Mehmet's capacity for rage and violence. It showed his determination to maintain control at all costs. And it proved in the clearest way possible that Halil Ünal had been right to fear for Tulay's life. The axe attack wasn't just an act of rage, it was a warning. A message: stay away from my family, forget my daughter, or you'll pay the price. But even behind bars, Mehmet Goren kept his secret. He said nothing about Tulay, and her whereabouts remained unknown. Although this conviction did not yet bring Tulay's case to light, the assault on Halil would later become a crucial part of the broader investigation. It helped establish Mehmet's capacity for violence and his deep determination to stop anyone who challenged his authority or dishonored his family. When Tulay Goren disappeared in early January 1999, police failed to take any immediate action. Despite her young age and the turbulent circumstances surrounding her return home, her disappearance was not treated as suspicious. Her father, Mehmet Goren, informed the authorities that Tulay had simply run away, just as she had done in the past. And without further questioning or investigation, the police accepted his explanation at face value. No search was conducted, no missing person alert was issued, there was no public appeal, no door-to-door inquiry, and no urgency. Tulay's absence was quietly filed away as another case of a teenager fleeing home. In reality, it was something far more serious. But at the time, the system failed to ask deeper questions, and Tulay's case slipped through the cracks. Meanwhile, inside the Goren household, a heavy silence hung over everything. But that silence was not ignorance, it was fear. Hanim Goren, Tulay's mother, knew far more than she let on. From the very beginning, when police first knocked on their door in early 1999, she stood by her husband Mehmet's story. She told them that Tulay had run away. She said she had no idea where her daughter had gone. It was a lie, a deliberate one, but one she believed she had no choice but to tell. For years, Hanim had lived under Mehmet's shadow, a man who ruled the home through fear, anger, and violence. He wasn't just controlling, he was dangerous. Hanim had endured years of physical and emotional abuse. She knew what her husband was capable of. Speaking out might not only put her in danger, but also her younger children, Hatis and Tunkai. So she did what many women in abusive households do. She stayed silent and pretended not to know. But silence doesn't mean peace. As the days passed after Tulay's disappearance, Hanim's inner world began to unravel. She watched her husband carry on with life as if nothing had happened. No grief, no panic, no real effort to search for the daughter who had supposedly run away. He told friends and relatives that Tulay had left again, just like she had before. and he expected everyone, especially his wife, to believe it. Hanim obeyed, at least on the surface. She repeated the story to police, to neighbors, and even to her own children. But inside, she was falling apart. She had seen things she couldn't unsee. 2 kitchen knives had gone missing, so had a roll of bin bags. A length of washing line, normally stored in a kitchen drawer, had vanished without explanation. Then there was the garden. Not long after Tulay vanished, Mehmet suddenly started digging outside. It wasn't part of any home improvement. It seemed secretive, rushed, and then it was dug up again days later. She noticed her husband washing his shirt, something he hadn't done himself in 30 years of marriage. And she saw fresh injuries on his hands, cuts and scrapes that hadn't been there before. All of it pointed to something terrible. Hanim couldn't prove it, and she hadn't witnessed it directly. But in her heart, she was certain Mehmet had killed their daughter. In March 1999, just 2 months after Tulay's disappearance, police arrested Mehmet Goren on suspicion of perverting the course of justice and possible involvement in murder. During her formal interview with detectives on the 23rd of March, something inside her broke. She admitted she had lied. She told police the truth, or at least as much as she knew. She hadn't seen Tulay's death with her own eyes, but she was convinced Mehmet was responsible. She described the missing items. She explained her husband's odd behavior. She revealed her growing fear and her belief that her daughter had not simply vanished, she had been silenced. This was a breakthrough. But in 1999, the legal system wasn't ready. With no body, no eyewitnesses, and a case built mostly on circumstantial evidence, the Crown Prosecution Service decided not to press charges at that time. The case was quietly set aside. The investigation was further hampered by the influence of family honor, which discouraged witnesses from speaking out, and by limited understanding of honor-based violence among British authorities at the time. As a result, the case stalled and Tulay's disappearance remained unresolved for years. By the mid-2000s, attitudes toward honor-based violence in the United Kingdom had started to shift. High-profile cases like the murders of Heshu Yones in 2002 and Banaz Mahmoud in 2006 had brought national attention to crimes committed in the name of honor. These tragedies exposed how deeply rooted cultural pressure, family control, and fear could lead to deadly outcomes, often with little intervention from the outside world. They also highlighted the serious gaps in which authorities had previously handled such cases. As awareness increased, law enforcement agencies began to review older, unresolved cases that might have involved honor-based motives. One of those cases was the disappearance of Tulay Goren. The decision was made to reopen the investigation in 2007. This reinvestigation came at a time when significant legal reforms were underway. New rules regarding the admissibility of evidence allowed hearsay and indirect testimony to be considered more broadly in court. Police also began receiving specialized training to better understand the nature of honor-based violence. They were now better prepared to identify red flags and take action, even when victims were reluctant or unable to come forward. Equipped with this training, and working under a more supportive legal framework, investigators turned their attention back to the Goren family. They re-examined earlier statements, particularly those made by Tulay's mother, Mehmet Goren. On the 25th of November 2008, police arrested Mehmet Goren once again. This time they also arrested his brothers, Ali and Kuma Goren, on suspicion of murder and conspiracy to murder. Detectives believe the brothers might have played a role in either planning Tulay's killing or helping to cover it up. 2 days later, on the 27th of November 2008, all 3 men were formally charged with the murder of Tulay Goren and with conspiracy to murder Halil Unal, the man she had planned to marry. In October 2009, the trial began at the Old Bailey, one of Britain's most prestigious and historic courtrooms. In the dock stood 3 men: Mehmet Goren, the father of the missing teenager, Ali Goren, Mehmet's older brother, and Kuma Goren, their younger sibling. Mehmet Goren faced the most serious charges. He was accused of murdering his own daughter, of luring her back home, tying her up, drugging her, and killing her in cold blood to restore his family's so-called honor. But despite the mounting evidence and the years of suspicion, Mehmet pleaded not guilty. At the start of the trial, Mehmet repeated the story he had told for years, that Tulay had run away from home and he had no idea where she had gone. But under the weight of evidence and expert questioning, his version of events began to shift. Mehmet changed his story. This time he claimed that he wasn't the one who had killed Tulay at all. According to him, it was his brother Ali who was behind everything. Mehmet told the court that after Tulay's planned marriage to Halil Ünal fell through in December 1998, it was Ali who ordered her execution. He said Ali was furious over the family's damaged honor and instructed Mehmet to kill both Tulay and Halil. But Mehmet insisted he had refused to go through with it. According to Mehmet, Ali then took Tulay away himself. He claimed Ali told him to cover up her disappearance by spreading a false story, that Tulay had been handed over to a Kurdish militant group. Mehmet told the court that he had simply obeyed that order and repeated the lie. He tried to paint himself not as a violent father, but as a man trapped between loyalty and fear. The prosecutors, however, didn't buy this new version of events. They saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. They argued that Mehmet Goren had always been the controlling figure, the one with a history of violence, the one who had previously assaulted Halil with an axe, and the one who had threatened Tulay repeatedly in the weeks leading up to her death. The prosecution maintained that the murder was premeditated and that Mehmet acted alone. He had brought Tulay back into the house under false pretenses, tied her to a chair, drugged her with coffee laced with sleeping tablets, and then killed her, most likely by smothering or strangulation. Later, he had buried her body in secret, possibly first in the garden and later in a different, unknown location. The prosecution stated clearly, this was an honor killing carried out to erase what he saw as shame. Mehmet Goren made the choice. Mehmet Goren committed the act. Ali Goren, the elder brother, strongly denied any involvement. He told the court that while he had tried to mediate in the family conflict, Mehmet had rejected his efforts. He claimed his relationship with Mehmet was distant and that he had no role in Tulay's disappearance. He denied ever coming to London on the date of her murder and insisted that the accusations were fabricated by his brother in a bid to escape blame. Kuma Goren, the youngest of the three, also denied any wrongdoing. While he was present in the family home on the day Tulay disappeared, the evidence did not firmly place him at the center of the crime. He claimed he was unaware of any plans to harm Tulay or Halil, and that he played no role in any cover-up. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the strongest evidence lay not in forensics, but in testimony, particularly that of one woman who had lived in silence for far too long. Mehmet Goren, Tulay's mother, stepped into the witness box with quiet strength. She was painfully aware that she would be speaking against her own husband, the father of her children, the man she had feared for decades. Her testimony would become the turning point in the entire case. She told the court what she had witnessed on the night of January 7, 1999. Her voice was calm but filled with sorrow. She repeated what she had told police years earlier during a confidential interview. Mehmet admitted that she had lied at first, terrified of what Mehmet would do to her or her surviving children. But now, she said, it was time to speak. Her guilt over staying silent was unbearable. She had lost a daughter and could no longer live with the weight of protecting the man she believed had killed her. Mehmet described how she came home that night to a harrowing sight. Tulay was tied up, face down on the floor, her wrists and ankles showing signs of bruising. Her daughter looked broken, physically and emotionally. And then Tulay spoke. "Mom, don't untie me. I want to die." Those were the words that stayed with Mehmet forever. She recounted how, the night before, Tulay had tried to escape through a bathroom window, only to be caught by her father. Mehmet grabbed her by the neck, dragged her back inside, and threatened to kill her if she tried to flee again. After that, he gave her coffee mixed with sleeping tablets to keep her quiet and subdued. And still, in her final moments, Tulay found a way to reach out one last time. While Mehmet left the room briefly, Tulay secretly called Halil, her boyfriend, the man she loved, the man she had hoped to marry. She whispered into the phone, "Don't come. It's a trap." That was her final warning, her last attempt to save someone else, even as her own life was slipping out of her control. Hanem continued her testimony with chilling clarity. She described how the next morning Tulay woke up crying. She didn't want breakfast. She simply sat in silence, staring at her mother. Later that day, Mehmet told Hanem to take the younger children, Hatice and Tuncay, to his brother Kuma's house and not return until he said so. He said he needed time to talk with Tulay. But Hanem now believes that was a lie. It wasn't a conversation. It was the setup for her murder. When she returned, Tulay was gone. Mehmet said she had run away. Again. Then he gave an order that confirmed Hanem's worst fears. From now on, we only have 3 children. Hanem revealed chilling details. 2 kitchen knives and a roll of bin bags had gone missing. Mehmet had scratches and a deep cut on his hand. He had washed his shirt, something he had never done in 30 years of marriage. The garden had been dug up and then dug again 4 days later. He came and went at odd hours, always telling her to stay inside. When asked why she hadn't come forward sooner, Hanem broke down. She said she had lived in fear. Not just for herself, but for her surviving children. She told the court she longed for a single piece of her daughter, even a bone, so she could bury Tulay next to her other daughter, Hatice, who had died in a car crash years later. The courtroom fell silent. Her words shook everyone present. Even as the defense tried to question her credibility, Hanem stood firm. She had once been silent, but now she was the voice Tulay never got to be. The prosecution built their case around this testimony and other supporting facts. They told the court how Mehmet had been furious about Tulay's relationship with Halil Unal. They described his attempts to bribe a registrar when Tulay was too young to marry legally. They pointed to his long-standing hostility towards Halil, including a physical assault weeks before Tulay disappeared. They also highlighted the inconsistencies in Mehmet's own story. The jury was also told about the wider family dynamic. Mehmet's 2 brothers, Ali and Kuma, were accused of assisting in the murder and helping dispose of Tulay's body. Both were present in the home on the day of her disappearance. However, the evidence against them was not as strong. While prosecutors believed they had played a role, there was not enough proof to convict them. Both men were acquitted. Mehmet Goren, however, was found guilty. On March 24, 2009, the jury returned its verdict, guilty of manslaughter. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum of 22 years behind bars. It was a rare case, one where a murder conviction was secured without a body, and one of the most high-profile honor-killing trials ever seen in Britain. Outside the courtroom, reactions were emotional. Tulay's mother, who had risked everything to testify, stood quietly as the verdict was read. For her, the journey had been long, painful, and full of risk. Her decision to speak had changed the course of the case and her life. Women's rights groups and legal advocates praised her courage. Her testimony was seen as a breakthrough in dealing with culturally sensitive cases of violence and control. Halil Unal, the man Tulay had loved and hoped to marry, was also present at times during the trial. He told reporters that justice had come late, but it had come. He recalled Tulay as a kind and hopeful young woman who wanted nothing more than to live a peaceful life. The case had wide-reaching effects. In the months that followed, police forces across the UK reviewed how they handled honor-based violence. Tulay's story became part of officer training materials, especially around recognizing warning signs and protecting vulnerable individuals who might be at risk from their own families. It also led to more open conversations within immigrant communities about tradition, control, and the line between culture and abuse. Many families began to rethink long-held beliefs about honor and shame, especially in the context of living in a country governed by individual rights and legal protections. Despite the conviction, one piece of the story remains unresolved. Tulay's body has never been found. During the trial, it was suggested that she had been buried in the garden of the family's former home in Woodford Green. Police conducted searches but found no remains. Other theories suggest she may have been buried elsewhere with the help of others. But without solid leads, investigators have been unable to locate her final resting place. For her mother, her siblings, and for Halil, this lack of closure remains a heavy burden. There is no grave to visit, no place to mourn, no final goodbye. Still, the trial gave Tulay back her name. For years, she had been forgotten by the public, hidden behind the silence of her disappearance. But now, her story is told, her life remembered, and her loss acknowledged. In the eyes of the court, her father was guilty. But for those who followed her case, the verdict meant more than justice. It meant that honor could no longer be used as an excuse, that silence would no longer protect the guilty, and that every young person, no matter their background, deserves the right to choose love, freedom, and life. The trial of Mehmet Goren was not just about one man or one family. It was about a system learning to listen, and a society taking one step closer to ensuring that what happened to Tulay would never happen again. Tulay Goren's case became a pivotal reference point in how the UK addresses honor-based violence. Following her father's conviction, her story was included in specialized training programs for police, helping officers understand the complex dynamics of family control, cultural pressure, and abuse that often go unnoticed. It became a key example used to educate law enforcement on the importance of identifying risk factors early, especially when a victim may be in danger from their own relatives. Her case was also raised in national policy discussions, particularly those focused on preventing forced marriage and protecting girls from abuse at home. Tulay's experience highlighted critical gaps in safeguarding systems and pushed authorities to take a more proactive, culturally informed approach. Her story helped influence reforms designed to improve how institutions respond to warning signs before it's too late. Tulay Goren's voice was silenced far too soon, but today, her story is being heard and remembered. If you believe stories like Tulay's deserve to be told, and if you want to support our mission to give voice to the voiceless, please subscribe to our channel. Click the subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and consider joining our membership community or leaving a super thanks to help us keep uncovering the truth, one story at a time. You're not just watching, you're helping justice be remembered.